Sergeant Dustin Wright, stop running. He ducks behind a tiny, wispy bush and tries to fire at the enemy, but there's only so much he can do, and that he too is overrun.
These men died in October, and the Pentagon promised a thorough investigation. When do you think we will see it?
Well, the latest that they announced was the last week of February. I have sources telling me that they don't think it'll come out until March. There has been obviously a delay here, and I can only imagine how grueling this period must have been for the families.
I should say that even though we're not focusing on it in this conversation, your article also goes into detail about these soldiers' lives before they joined the military, what their families were left with after they died, and,
yes.
and a lot more than we're discussing right now.
And I should make very clear that this was a very large team effort. I'm not the only person who wrote this piece or who contributed to it.
Rukmini Callimachi is part of the New York Times team that reported the new article, An Endless War, Why 4 U.S. Soldiers Died in a Remote African Desert. Thanks so much.
It's my pleasure, Ari. Thank you.
Every Olympics, it seems like people turn into overnight experts on whatever event happens to be on. Who knew that we could so easily master the subtleties of the 4x10 cross-country ski relay? And then, hurling. Well, while the world has been focused on Pyeongchang, you might have missed this competition in Las Vegas last week for an activity that most of us do regularly. Bagging groceries. And the 2018 Best Grocery Bagger in America is Trevor DeForest, a 35-year-old assistant manager at Fairway Groceries in Maquoketa, Iowa.
Everybody out in the crowd just went crazy, and you literally you sacked as fast as you possibly could.
Just sacked as fast as you could. DeForest has been sacking since the age of 14. His dad's a grocery manager, so he's had plenty of opportunity. What's more, he's from a state with a strong sacking tradition. This is the 7th time Iowa has won the National Grocery Association's Best Bagger honor.
It was a really big deal. I mean, there's 23 states that are involved in it. It's a big bragging right.
The challenge? Bag identical grocery orders, putting about 35 items into 3 grocery bags. Competitors were scored on speed, weight distribution, and proper arrangement.
Style is a big portion of the competition, so the way you put your stuff in the sacks really matters. You got to build a foundation, and then with your canned goods and your boxes, and then you kind of lay the eggs and chips and bread all on top and stuff like that.
DeForest also knew to avoid a rookie mistake.
Putting glass along the edge of the sack, so then if something were to bump into it, it would break.
The prize? $10,000. DeForest now has something to help pay for his own groceries, and that'll come in handy. He has 5 kids. You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News. Many animals that live in the ocean communicate with sound, like this humpback whale. But these voices could soon be drowned out by powerful sonic booms set off in the ocean by energy companies. The Trump administration is opening up the Atlantic coast to oil and gas exploration. Biologists say just the process of looking for undersea reservoirs could threaten ocean life, as NPR's Christopher Joyce reports.
There's a human-made sound that dwarfs all others in the ocean, the boom of seismic air guns. 5 companies plan to use air guns to survey thousands of miles of seabed along the Atlantic coast. That could start later this year. The air guns are towed behind a ship. They compress and then release air explosively, and the sound waves penetrate the seabed to reveal reservoirs of oil and gas. Ships have to turn them off if they see whales or other marine mammals nearby. The sound blasts can damage the ears and internal organs of animals. But scientists are increasingly concerned about less obvious effects of air guns well outside the immediate danger zone. Aaron Thode is an oceanographer who studied the effects of air guns.
We don't know what would happen if animals were exposed constantly to sound over long periods of time in, say, a feeding area, a breeding area, or whatnot.
Thode works at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. He says whales have been observed retreating from the sound of air guns. That could cause them to abandon breeding or feeding grounds. Thode has also discovered that bowhead whales start calling more often to each other when there's air gun noise, at least for a while.
At some point, just as if a jet plane passes overhead, you'll just kind of give up and wait for the sounds to decrease.
Whales and dolphins and even fish signal each other with sound. Marine biologist Doug Novacek at Duke University worries that air guns could overwhelm that communication. That could cause a mother, for example, to lose its calf.
So if they get separated by a few tens or hundreds of meters in an increasingly loud ocean, you can consider it gone.
Novacek says new evidence shows animals can be a long way from the air guns and still be affected.
The levels that could still have and do have behavioral impact extend out tens to hundreds of miles away from those surveys.
And effects on smaller animals are emerging as well. Research in Australia shows that air guns can actually kill shrimp-like plankton. Moreover, the sound is pervasive. Surveyors fire the air guns several times a minute for months at a time. Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke described the energy plan at a press conference last January. He promised that the government will protect the environment.
We do it right, and we're not going to skirt protections. We're not going to give anyone a pass. We're going to hold corporations accountable.
The Interior Department completed an environmental impact study on seismic surveying in 2014. It says the effects on marine life will be moderate at worst. They point out that surveyors will stop their work if they see or hear whales within 500 yards and will keep away from places they're known to frequent. But more than 70 scientists have written to President Trump asking him to cancel the surveys anyway. They note that the blasting covers regions populated by several kinds of whales that are in danger of extinction. Doug Novacek is one of those scientists.
There are numerous species off the Atlantic coast that have never been, we don't have any data whatsoever about their response to seismic.
The Interior Department is expected to rule on the surveying permits in the next few weeks. Environmental and other interest groups are preparing to legally challenge any permit to allow seismic testing. Christopher Joyce, NPR News.
You're listening to All Things Considered on WNYC. Ever wonder about all that ice at the Winter Games and who takes care of it? They're called the Ice Meisters. They're the people in charge of creating those perfect Olympic rinks and arenas, all that perfect ice. Each sport, from curling to speed skating to figure skating, requires a different kind of ice and different density and different temperature of ice. We're going to meet the Ice Meisters coming up next. Stay tuned.
February is Black History Month, and WNYC is celebrating with a range of programs, including Shackled Legacy, which explores American colleges and universities and their ties to the slave trade. Plus, a look at Black America since Martin Luther King Jr., hosted by Henry Louis Gates Jr. Tune in all this week at 9 p.m. on 93.9 FM and find all our Black History Month specials at wnyc.org/Black History Month.
Support for WNYC comes from Virgin Atlantic, with nonstop flights from New York to London daily. More info at virginatlantic.com. Virgin Atlantic, let it fly. WNYC is a media partner of New York International Children's Film Festival, presenting over 100 new films from around the world for children and teens. This Friday through March 18th. Details at nyicff.org.
Tonight, rain before 9 o'clock and then drizzle until midnight. Lows will be in the 40s. Tomorrow, Tuesday, we'll have patchy drizzle and fog before noon. Otherwise, mostly cloudy with a high near 65 degrees. And looking ahead to Wednesday, get this, the fog is going to give way to partly sunny skies and a high near 70 degrees. Currently, it's 48 degrees. It's overcast in Central Park.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro. In the Winter Olympics, where races can be won or lost by thousandths of a second, tiny imperfections make all the difference. For the sports on ice, skilled technicians work hard to create the perfect surface. And as NPR's Melissa Block found in Pyeongchang, each ice sport has its own distinct needs.
Let's start at the Oval, the gleaming venue for long track speed skating.
Yeah, it looks good. The corners are wearing really nicely, so they're not wearing out from all the laps that are going on. There's not a whole bunch of chunks coming up.
I'm with Mark Messer, who spent 2 years getting this oval into top form.
Very nice and quiet, too. If it's not good ice, the blades will kind of grind in the ice, and it's nice and clean sound here.
Messer is Canadian, of course, and he's got the best job title ever.
Ice Meister. It's even written on my accreditation, so...
When people ask what he does for a living...
I usually tell people I make ice.
And all ice is definitely not created equal. Messer explains that long track speed skating requires the coldest ice of all the sports, chilled to between 14 and 21 degrees Fahrenheit. It's also the hardest ice.
We're trying to get as little friction as possible. So we have to make a balance between grip and glide. Enough grip so that the skate can push and get a good push off it. But then we want them to glide as far as possible so that there's less effort expended for the long distance.
Skaters will tell you they know instantly if the ice is great or lousy. Lana Gehring is on the U.S. short track speed skating team.
One of the first things when we step onto the ice is like, how's this ice? Instant judgment to it, so.
A lot of information transmitted through a skate blade just 1 millimeter thick.
All that input is coming directly up to our bodies, so we're able to tell like right away, like if it's tense, if it's grippy, if it's breaky, if it's too rough.
In short track speed skating, the ice is thicker and warmer than long track ice. Hockey ice, a bit warmer still. What's especially tricky at the Olympics is that short track speed skating shares a rink with figure skating, two totally different sports with different ice needs in the same space, the ice arena.
C'est pas du tout le même travail.
That's Jaime Boller, the French ice meister at the arena.
Pour le patinage artistique, la différence c'est que il faut une glace qui soit très souple.
Boller says figure skaters need warmer, supple ice so they can dig in for jumps. If the ice is too hard and cold, it'll explode when they land. But short track speed skaters need colder, faster ice. It takes about 3 hours to adjust the temperature from one sport to the other. The best way for Boller to tell if he's got it right?
Ce qui me sert le plus sur la glace sont mes oreilles.
What I use most are my ears, he says. I use them all the time.
Tout le temps. Tout le temps. Quand j'arrive...
When I arrive, he says, I take off my cap so I can really listen to the sound of the blades if they're gliding or cracking. And when the ice is great, he can tell by the skaters' faces.
Et quand on les voit et qu'ils commencent à patiner, que la glace est belle et qu'on voit le sourire.
When you see them smiling, he says, that's the best feeling of all. Finally, curling ice, a totally different animal. Look closely at the ice sheets and you'll see they're not smooth. They're textured with tiny dots called pebbles.
We have what you call pebbling cans with pebble heads.
This is curling ice meister Hans Wuttrich.
We add wee little water droplets on there. And those wee little water droplets, they're the thing that touches the bottom of the curling stone. So that's what the rock actually rides on and makes it go easy. And that's also what makes it go.
So when you're watching these Olympics, think for a moment about the ice meisters who devote their lives to creating ice that's so perfect, you'll never notice it at all. Melissa Block, NPR News, Pyeongchang.
You're listening to All Things Considered on WNYC. I'm Jamie Floyd. Leaders at the Black and Latino Caucus this weekend are hoping 2018 is the year criminal prosecutors get a government oversight board like those that monitor police officers and judges. WNYC's Fred Mokel reports from Albany.
Many proposed criminal justice reforms are in the air at the annual caucus weekend, which draws thousands of community activists from around the state. One workshop, led by a top aide to Governor Cuomo, discussed a bill that would create an Office of Conduct to field complaints against prosecutors and sanction them for withholding evidence and other misdeeds. City Councilman Jumaane Williams, who's running for lieutenant governor, praised the current DA in Brooklyn, but said earlier regimes had many more problems.
When it comes to DA's prosecutorial misconduct and other issues, what I realize is we need a statewide response.
Several speakers relayed tales of false accusations and imprisonment. But Bronx District Attorney Darcel Clark came out against the proposal. She said state courts already handle these matters through grievance committees.
There is a system in place. Granted, it may need some reform or some revisions, but there's a place already for that.
DAs have also expressed concern that defense attorneys would slow down proceedings with frivolous allegations against prosecutors. The proposal has put minority lawmakers from the city in league with John DeFrancisco, the Senate's powerful Republican deputy majority leader and leading GOP candidate for governor this fall. He's the lead sponsor of a bill in the Senate. The bill spent last year in committee in both chambers, but supporters believe it could join other criminal justice reforms this year that seem to be gaining momentum, including a proposed overhaul of the pretrial bail and detention system. In Albany, Fred Mogul, WNYC News.
You're listening to All Things Considered on WNYC. I'm Jamie Floyd. It's Black History Month, and we're looking at some of the history in the New York area. WNYC's Danny Lewis reports that one of America's first free black communities was founded right in the heart of Brooklyn.
Back when Brooklyn was not much more than a collection of farms and rolling hills, the town of Weeksville was one of New York's largest black communities. Nestled in modern-day Crown Heights, the town was founded in the 1830s by a longshoreman named James Weeks, just after the state banned slavery. Rob Fields is executive director of the Weeksville Heritage Center. He says the town's location outside of Manhattan made it a safe haven.
You had to take a boat to get here and get across the river, and they could build a life and they could be in a community that was largely free from racially inspired violence.
At the time, black freemen were allowed to vote if they owned property, and after a few families settled in the area, more followed. Field says at its peak in the 1880s, about 500 people lived in Weeksville.
There were two churches that came out of this community, one of which is still right down the road from us. There was an orphanage, there was a retirement home, there was colored school number 2, there was a baseball team, a newspaper.
As more and more people moved from Manhattan, Weeksville was absorbed by the growing city. Today, just 3 original buildings are still standing. But Fields says they can play an important role in teaching young black New Yorkers how deep their ties to the city go.
It adds nuance and depth to their understanding. And even for adults, a lot of adults don't know about the history of this community.
Danny Lewis, WNYC News.
Listening to WNYC. Stay tuned for another hour of All Things Considered, and later WNYC continues the celebration of Black History Month with a special. Tonight we'll bring you The Invention of Race. The hour traces the development of racial and racist ideas from the ancient world, when there was no notion of race, up to the founding of the United States as fundamentally a nation of and for white people. That's our special tonight in celebration of Black History Month. It begins at 9 o'clock on 93.9 FM. And you can find all our Black History Month specials at WNYC.org/Black History Month. Tonight it will be rainy and drizzly until about midnight. Currently it's 48 degrees and overcast in Central Park at 5 o'clock.
Support for NPR comes from WNYC members and from Visiting Angels, professional caregivers assisting adults in bathing, dressing, meals, and lighthouse work nationwide. Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care. Office locations are at visitingangels.com. The Candida Fund, supporting individual dignity and sustainable communities through investments in transformative leaders and ideas. Learn more at kendedafund.org. And Staples, with storage solutions for business, including file folders, bankers' boxes, and storage bins for getting organized. More at Staples stores or staples.com. Staples, it's pro time.
This is WNYC FM, HD, and AM New York.
The Parkland, Florida shooting has spurred student activists to advocate for gun control, but will that mean action on Capitol Hill? I'm Jamie Floyd. It's President's Day. This is All Things Considered on WNYC. State lawmakers in Florida are talking about how constituents are reacting to last week's deadly school shooting.
People don't understand how an 18-year-old can buy an AR-15, but he can't have a beer, can't even rent a car.
Gun laws are suddenly a big issue for lawmakers in Florida and in Washington, D.C. A closer look coming up. Plus, the fallout continues over Russian bots and the U.S. election. And the run-up to the Oscars is on this hour. A conversation with Greta Gerwig, nominated for her film Lady Bird. The director joins us after news headlines.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. The suspect in last week's Florida school shooting was in court today for a procedural hearing. Reporter David Obaye is a reporter with the Miami Herald and has more on the court hearing.
Nicholas Cruz shuffled into court. He was wearing a red jumpsuit. There was a lot of security. It was a very tense atmosphere. The point of the hearing had to do with a court document that had been filed by his defense attorneys. They were seeking to keep it sealed from the court file and from prosecutors. It was all a little cryptic. The Broward, the chief assistant public defender, declined to discuss what it was all about, but the judge ruled it was a limited motion that had to do with access to their client, that it could remain sealed.
Nicholas Cruz is charged with killing 17 people at a Florida high school last week and injuring others. His lawyers have said he will plead guilty if prosecutors agree not to pursue the death penalty. No decision has yet been made in the case. Dozens of teens, joined by parents and educators, took to protest over recent gun violence to the White House today. The teens spreading their bodies on the pavement as part of a plea for presidential action on gun control in the wake of a shooting at a Florida high school by a lone gunman wielding a semi-automatic style assault weapon. 17-year-old high school junior Hollis Cutler says it's important to express their anger over recent gun violence.
It's not just adults, it's not just politicians. Kids in high school, kids in college, elementary school, middle school, we're all behind this issue because if we don't stand up, our voices will never be heard, and real change needs to happen now, and that's the way that it's going to be done. President Trump met with some of the first responders from last week's shooting and spent the weekend at his Florida Golf Club about 40 miles from the site of the shooting in Parkland, Florida. The 19-year-old suspect in the case faces 17 counts of premeditated murder. An Iranian minister says harsh conditions continue to hamper emergency crews at the scene of Sunday's plane crash. NPR's Peter Kenyon reports all 65 people on board are believed dead.
Iran's transport minister is quoted by the state news agency as saying rain, snow, and difficult terrain have slowed efforts to retrieve wreckage and victims from the Asaman Airlines crash. The response includes helicopters, relief workers, and climbers who reached the mountainous site of the crash. The plane was flying from Tehran to the southern city of Yasuj when it went down, according to the airline. Iran has struggled for years with an aging fleet of passenger planes, with international sanctions preventing it from being upgraded. The 2015 nuclear agreement lifted many sanctions, but most of the planes Tehran has ordered since then have yet to be delivered. Peter Kenyon, NPR News, Istanbul.
U.S. financial markets are closed for the President's Day holiday, though there was trading on European exchanges today. Stocks drifted mostly lower in Europe, with the German DAX down 0.3%. The FTSE 100 in Britain fell by a similar amount. The CAC 40 in Paris fell 0.2% today. You're listening to NPR.
This is WNYC in New York. I'm Jamie Floyd. Senator Chuck Schumer says President Trump's proposed budget cuts will take millions of dollars away from existing background check systems for gun ownership. The Democrat says that after Wednesday's school shooting in Parkland, Florida, it would be dangerous to let guns fall into the wrong hands.
states need to be given the dollars so they can send the list of felons and the list of those adjudicated mentally ill to the federal system, and then anyone can learn. Any gun store owner can learn that that person shouldn't get a gun.
Trump's budget for fiscal 2019 was released last Monday, just before the shooting that killed 17 people. Criminal justice reform was at the top of the agenda at the annual Black and Latino Legislators Caucus this weekend. Top proposals would eliminate bail for most people arrested by police and step up enforcement of the constitutional right to a speedy trial. Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez says judges need computerized risk assessment tools to apply new bail rules fairly and consistently statewide. And he says the court system needs to ensure the tools are used correctly.
I understand the concerns about them, that they could be used to actually incarcerate more people and release people, but I think there are ways around that.
Gonzalez says New Jersey already uses these assessment tools and that they seem to be working there. Gonzalez is already ordering Brooklyn prosecutors to seek bail less frequently. And a New York college says it has discovered a lock of George Washington's hair this President's Day. It was pressed in the pages of an old book, and while officials at Union College up in Schenectady can't say for sure it's the real deal, historical evidence suggests that it is authentic. Library archivists found the snippet in an old almanac that belonged to Philip Schuyler, whose father was one of the college's founders back in 1795. The Schuylers were friends of Washington and related by marriage to Alexander Hamilton. Union has no plans to put the hair through DNA testing, which could destroy part of the lock. Currently 48 degrees. It's overcast in Central Park at 5:06.
Support for NPR comes from Trader Joe's, where they have a double dozen tulips for the love of one's life, gummy X's and O's for a new flame, or Zoug sauce for those not quite ready to commit, at TraderJoe's.com and at Trader Joe's on Instagram.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Ari Shapiro. Students from Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida spent the weekend urging lawmakers to get tougher on guns. They were on social media, on TV, and at rallies. In a moment, we'll hear more about them and how some conservatives are responding to their message. First, Florida's legislature has 3 weeks left in this session. Has suddenly made was more personal to you than it was to many Florida lawmakers. You are a graduate of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School.
Yeah, Parkland is a town that I grew up in. I went to Marjory Stoneman Douglas. I graduated in '99. I drive on those roads past the school almost daily. My 4-year-old son goes to preschool around the corner. This is my backyard. I know these people.
And so how did you spend this weekend?
This weekend's been difficult. It's been going to funerals, going to vigils, talking to students, talking to parents. It's been dealing with the next 3 weeks of session, trying to get something accomplished. If we don't get it done by March 9th, we don't meet again until December after the 2018 elections. I'm attending funerals where people are screaming and cursing into the microphone based on their anger. They're looking at their teenage son or daughter in pine boxes ready to be put in the ground, all because they sent their kid to school. That's the only thing that they did. And I think to myself, I have a 4-year-old. What if the shooter didn't go to Douglas? He went around the corner to my son's preschool. And what if he had gotten to my child? Would I decide to bury my son in his favorite pajamas? Would I take his favorite stuffed animal? These are the things that have been going through my head as I watch parents go through that identical exercise with their teenage child. And I think to myself, it has to be different. Washington is broke. Nothing's going to happen in Washington. But Tallahassee has 3 weeks. We have 3 weeks. We have a unique opportunity. Pulse did not happen during session, and they did not want to come back into session after Pulse.
The Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando.
That's correct. I led the effort to try to get a special session, and there were not enough votes to take us into special session. Enough folks on the other side of the aisle voted against going into special session. And then the headline changed and we did nothing. It was back to business as usual. So we must come together as Democrats and Republicans and figure out how we change the laws.
So you attend these vigils and these funerals as a parent, as a member of the community, as a graduate of the high school, and as a lawmaker. And do people come up to you? Did people approach you over the weekend and say, as a lawmaker, this is what I want you to do?
People are coming up to me, they're calling me, they're emailing me, they're texting me. They want meaningful gun control. They want something to happen with assault weapons and rifles. People don't understand how an 18-year-old can buy an AR-15, but he can't have a beer. He can't even rent a car from Alamo or Enterprise. We've deemed it unsafe for a teenager to go rent a car, but not unsafe to have an AR-15 and extended magazines and enough ammo to go to war on the streets of America.
When you talk with your Republican colleagues in the legislature, and you say, I want to do all these many things, is there one or two that they say, well, we can definitely get on board with that?
I think raising the age to be able to have an AR-15, raising that to the age of the same age it would take to buy a handgun. I think increased background checks. I think waiting periods. I think those are things that like-minded Democrats and Republicans, people trying to find common ground, parents from both sides of the aisle can get behind.
Florida's Governor Rick Scott has said that everything is on the table. He also has a lot of support from gun rights groups. He has an A+ rating from the NRA. Do you think he would embrace anything that the legislature might pass?
Well, I would say, listen,